another day. It's dawn. It's a good place to start the day, any day, down here by the water. One can get away for a few minutes from most of the outward and visible signs of urban life. This particular spot was a boyhood favourite of mine. It's close to the centre of Australia's most sprawling metropolis. But if I look across the water, I can forget that and pacify my mind. For me, today will be another day of seeking to understand how and why different people feel different things about their cities, towns and suburbs. Equally, it'll be another day of striving to change those cities, towns and suburbs. I'm preoccupied with people's emotional and practical responses to their everyday physical environment. As a member of planning teams, I grapple with the problems of planning new cities and suburbs and reshaping old ones. I'm what the British call a town and country planner, or the Americans a city and regional planner. I prefer the French or Italian word, urbanist. This is the house in Randwick, Sydney, where I was born. And this is the way I saw the world. My earliest memory is of pressing my nose against a window pane, looking out over this pretty typical synoptic view of urban Australia. My childhood was spent exploring this panorama on foot. I walked to and from school, the shops, the beaches. I played on vacant lots. I wandered through the wild, unbuilt-upon gullies, where the terrors of the gully gang lay in wait with stones and slingshots in the winding tunnels cut through the lantana and blackberry bushes. I wondered how and why some people built flats and some houses. Why did some own and some rent? Why was some so cramped, others so spacious? What was the street system so crazy? How did it get laid out? And how did it grow? Why were trees so thick in some places, so missing in others? Why did the tramways snake so radially outward from the city? Why were the shops and factories distributed as they were? Why were some so busy, some so empty? Why did the Catholics and the Protestants avoid one another, even when they lived so mixed up together? Was there really an underground city of drain pipes and tunnels? Why was there an overhead network of poles and wires? How did this process of urban growth begin? What forces underlay its evolution? How did it continue to change? Who made what decisions? And why was the result so mean-spirited, so dull? Why did nobody seem to care? Were there better ways of shaping cities and suburbs? These things I wondered as a high school boy and university student, as each day for the best part of 10 years, I rode the old Clovelly tram to and from the city. Some lines of Walt Whitman's, first read on that tram, impressed me tremendously. There was a child went forth every day, and the first object he looked upon, that object he became, and that object became part of him for the day, or a certain part of the day, or for many years, or stretching cycles of years. I was convinced that there must be better ways of arranging cities and suburbs than people in the 1930s and 1940s knew about. I was going to find those better ways. My search led me through 10 years of tertiary education in Australia, Italy, the UK and the United States. My formal studies were in architecture and urban planning, but I gained most from explorations of my own outside those fields. I had serious intellectual doubts about the validity of any kind of social planning at all. The philosophers disabused me about the common good. I learnt that economic or social planning is a very inexact science. Society is a great mixture of conflicting interest groups. I learnt that we have to constantly review and revise our longer-term plans in the light of experience and in the light of the feedback of new information that we gain only through action. As I travelled in Italy, I marvelled at the sensuous beauty of old Italian towns and wondered by what intuitive social, cultural processes they'd grown. In Britain, I experienced the great experiments of post-war British socialism, the attempts to nationalise land, the buildings of the new town, all directed by aspirations for social justice. But the British at that time had no concept of citizen participation in planning. All of the policy decisions and programs were decided and directed by the elites of the upper class civil servants and professionals. It was in the United States that I came across the melting pot of community planning as a battlefield of conflicting interests. Now, perhaps the Americans' greatest contribution to human civilization has been their heroic aspirations to have their cake and eat it too. They want development and conservation. They want efficiency and beauty. They want justice and the full participation of everybody in decision-making. No wonder they get themselves into so many messes so often. Now, it's taken more than a decade for Australians to develop a similar popular ferment about the environment.
I think that one of the things which has struck me is that there's been so little direction amongst the public in general as to precisely what kind of an environment they really want.
I've learnt that people get the kind of cities they deserve. If we want better cities, towns and suburbs, then our whole community has got to go back to school. And it's beginning to happen here.
Trying to tell everyone how to run it. So, possibly we should try and look at a combination of policies to try and see the solution and not just say that the elite will tell us what to do.
How are you going to manage to raise the level of consciousness and awareness amongst the people to achieve this?
Yeah, well, this is part of I don't think we're going to get it in this sort of society. This is some sort of, I suppose, post-revolutionary society. We must raise the consciousness now, and this is what we're hoping, I suppose. Well, I hope to see some sort of conscious state after it.
There is not, in general, a great awareness of the people about what people want in the nature of any environmental situation.
People, the press, the media, various other organisations have not only planted out deliberate lies, but also channeled us in the wrong direction. I think they've got a very big vested interest in this thing.
Such grassroots involvement in the problems of the cities made them a national election issue. And in the years since then, Mr. Whitlam has contributed a number of articles to the Royal Australian Planning Institute Journal and has also addressed meetings organised by the New South Wales Division of the Institute on several occasions. So we are very pleased that he's able to come here tonight and speak to us on the general subject of urban development.
I am satisfied that if there's to be another inland city in Australia, it has to be a demonstrable success promptly. And I have no doubt that the best prospect is Albury-Wodonga. By derivation, civilised people live in cities and people who live in the country are pagans. And of course, but one learns, one doesn't make Latinate jokes in public life. But still, until quite recently, people still used to think that I meant by the word city, a four-letter word, the state capitals. Now, only in the Australian Federation is the word city defined as a state capital. In the United States or in Canada, and still more in West Germany, there are scores of cities of, 200,000 or 300,000 people that aren't state or provincial or land capitals. So when I'm using the word city, for God's sake, I'm not just referring to state capitals. I'm referring to a place of a decent, viable size, and it shouldn't be regarded as a four-letter word.
State and local government political leaders now recognise urban planning as a social learning process, a raising of consciousness involving the whole community. South Australia's Premier, Don Dunstan.
The history of contemporary town planning is swollen with social tragedies and economic injustices done under the name of good planning. Some planners have forgotten or walked over the people they were planning for. I believe it's absolutely essential that a very high level of community consultation occur in the planning process. And in Adelaide planning, the voice of the resident pensioner or householder should have the same penetration and persuasiveness as that of the managing director or chartered accountant. For Adelaide is not some kind of exclusive commercial club, the membership of which is determined by the position of one's office block. It is the heart of the metropolitan area, the property of all its people, the capital of the state, the commercial centre of the region, and the home of 14,000 people. And one would like to see it shortly the home of 40,000 or so, giving it life and vitality throughout the day and the week. I believe this will happen within a relatively short period, and that within an even shorter period, Mr. Clarke, Urban Systems, Council and the Development Committee will set Adelaide's shape for its next 137 years.
Author of the book Ideas for Australian Cities, member of the City of Adelaide Development Committee, and a friend and mentor of mine, Hugh Stretton.
It's a wide open city that's emptied and blighted and residents are leaving it. It's got a wonderful amount of land and there are many good things you can do, and I think probably without difficulty you can turn this into a very high-class place to live. And what I worry about is who gets hurt when the city does that, when the prices go up and the rich start to buy out the poor and that sort of thing. And this square is a very good example. If you look along there, there's a row of Victorian terrace houses that's been beautifully done up, and very rich people live in it. The Chief Justice lives in one corner. And if you look a bit further round, those two rows of terraces are very largely flop houses. They're rooms let by the night for $1, $1.25 a night, and that's the only resort in town for old men, itinerant commercial travellers who've got not much money, nowhere to sleep, winos, people whose habits just mean they won't go and live with the Salvation Army. And there are very good reasons why they ought to live in the city. This is where their services are and their friends are and that sort of thing. It seems to me the problem is how you do the good things that make this quieter and better looking and nicer to live in, more interesting to walk around, but somehow keep a place in the city for the people who work here, you know, on low incomes, mothers of families who are keeping a family without a husband, old men who need a place to sleep and so on.
The questions Hugh Stretton raises and the demands he makes are among the thousands of ideas and policies that we are currently seeking and considering in the course of our 18 months intensive work program for the City of Adelaide Development Plan. We've broken the program down into 4 stages, each of 4 months. And in each stage, we'll be considering the problems and opportunities of the City of Adelaide. Now, during this process, we'll be seeking the views of thousands of Adelaide citizens and of all the government departments, both state and federal, as well as community organisations. Now, we'll be going through successive drafts of our reports. We'll be publishing these, putting them out for discussion, particularly through the newspapers and the media, and we'll be all the time seeking criticism and comment. Finally, we will end up with a fully documented report and a concise series of recommendations, not only of policies, but also recommendations for action. Now, that report itself will go on public exhibition, again, for formal public comment and objection before decisions are made. So you see, there's a lot involved in this community learning process of planning. It takes a long time, a lot of effort, and involves thousands of people. We planners have to be good listeners and also pretty patient people.
And it's been proposed by the appropriate committee that Mr. Hugh Stretton, author of the best-selling book, Ideas for Australian Cities.
Qualified and experienced planners are corporate members of the Royal Australian Planning Institute, here in committee. The 20th century planning profession has evolved slowly in Australia and has had to fight hard for recognition. Pretty well all the things professional planners have been advocating for decades are only now being accepted and embraced by the practical men of politics, government and business.
One of his most outstanding concerns. And at the moment he's actively engaged in just doing that kind of thing.
When I returned to Australia in 1960, I searched for a challenging and creative planning job in government. I couldn't find one, and so set up an independent organisation of urban researchers, planners, designers, architects and engineers. Our firm, for example, now has research, planning and design teams in 6 offices throughout Australia. The toughest job we've so far tackled has been the City of Sydney Strategic Plan, which in 1971 began the long, difficult process of initiating, after decades of neglect, strong action to achieve the major objectives of more diversity in the city, a better social and physical environment, and greater accessibility. When we started this work, we found that the conflicting interest groups and opinion leaders in the City of Sydney were like a mob of wild horses, plunging and rearing entirely out of control. We're searching out the opinions and demands of all sorts of different people, such as Jack Mundy, Secretary of the Builders Labourers Federation.
Jack, what do you feel are the important things we should put into the 1974 strategic plan for Sydney?
First of all, I think you've got a mammoth task, because we've seen in the last decade the virtual destruction of the City of Sydney in the tremendous imbalance that has taken place, not only in Sydney, but in the near inner part. We have seen, haven't we, in the last few years, the developers, or so-called developers, are waxing fat, building great commercial edifices. At the same time, we are seeing the removal of theatres, nightclubs, of places with a bit of colour, things that are part of a city, that make a city live.
Property Investment Manager of the AMP and President of the Building Owners and Managers Association, Ray Powis.
I think the most important thing to do is to remember that the city is an economic unity. Most of the buildings in the City of Sydney belong to private people, private companies. There are a number of government buildings and there are a few institutions like churches, but in the main, the city has to work economically, and it has to be remembered that these buildings and these properties mainly belong to companies whose directors have the job of making them pay.
We've seen, 20 or 30 buildings in the last couple of years razed to the ground, yet these buildings were part of our heritage, part of our... we haven't got much history, and these were part of it. And because of the so-called progress, inverted commas, we've seen these buildings destroyed. Now, I think that there's got to be proper compensation to the owners of those buildings. There has to be enacted legislation, as exists in most other countries of the world, as you would know, so as to assist town planners and architects to preserve the best of former periods.
Now, the developers get a lot of the blame for what happens in Sydney, and this is partly right, because some developers have done some very bad things, but the developer these days is interested in retaining a long-term interest in the development that he undertakes, and when he does this, he realises that he's got to develop something that the people want, something like Centre Point here, for instance. This is what the people want. You can see the people walking through here. It's always crowded. It's a successful development. So the developers aren't going to build something that the people of the city don't want, or their development is not going to be successful.
We want everyday democracy. We want people having a say in the changing city of ours. And therefore, if you take note of that, I think we can restore some of the beauty and loveliness that was once Sydney.
For 183 years since the first settlement here at Sydney Cove, Australians have believed that the opening of new roads, the building of roads, the widening of existing roads is one of the holiest and most highly regarded things that can be done. But let us take one concrete example here in Martin Place of the quite revolutionary change in that attitude that may be said to have begun in the year 1971. Here, for the first time, a key piece of an inner-city roadway has, in fact, been closed to vehicular traffic and opened for the use of pedestrians. Now, the learning process involved in doing this simple little beginning of what is needed in the city has already occupied 20 years of my life. It was in the early 50s when I was working for the Cumberland County Council that I first saw that Sydney needed a city-wide pedestrian network so that one could walk from one side of the city to the other without ever coming into conflict with vehicles. But of course, such a notion was a piece of romantic heresy to the practical men then in charge of affairs. Now, it wasn't until the actions of the new City Council in 1969, the reaction of Cabinet to public opinion in 1970, that Martin Place was closed for a trial period of 6 months, which was rapidly ended when, after a period of a very few months, it was shown conclusively by the people of Sydney that they liked the temporary closing and they wanted it made permanent.
One of the decision makers who is deeply involved in the community learning process in city planning, Alderman Leo Port.
The public actually made the decision about Martin Place, and they only made it after they had had the opportunity to learn what it could be like in practice.
Right. Now, the next part of the learning process, they've learned that the bit between George Street and Pitt Street is magnificent. So we're going ahead from Pitt Street all the way up to Macquarie Street, and they're learning and they're appreciating it. This thing has got a little stall for selling donuts and coffee. The next bit will have a bit for selling everything else. It'll have a restaurant, a terrace, a waterfall, and all the other things you and your fellows have been able to dream up, right?
Well, over there, that flower stall, for instance, represents the whole idea of getting some fun back into the city.
Fun and colour. Well,
yes.
That was different again. A lot of people said, oh, in other cities they've got baskets of flowers hanging from the light poles, remember? And we said, well, why do anything as useless as that? Let's have something useful, and there it is. It provides colour, it provides something useful at the same time.
Well, I think now that people have learnt that a simple plaza like this, which is pretty clear, and you remember it had to be kept clear because it contains the cenotaph, the Holy of Holies in Australian history, for the rest of Martin Place now we can go ahead and fill that with people attracting fun and leisure things.
The man leading the overall planning process, including King's Cross, Alderman Andrew Brigger.
We've got the commercial community, we've got the very large motels, hotels, which attract the international and the local tourist trade. Their interests conflict considerably with a smaller shopkeeper who's an anxious man who watches the redevelopment of this area with great anxiety because he sees that his kind of business may be pushed out. Then you have the residents who again are divided. There are those who own property here who are apprehensive about any kind of change whatever, even if it be an advertising hoarding. Then you've got the resident who's been here for many years, the low-income man, a man who is a pensioner, who perhaps only pays a few dollars for a little miserable room, and who is threatened by the large overdevelopments or development schemes that are now coming forward in the area. He is frightened. And of course, this is a metropolitan playground. Yet we have problems now of a hippie. We've got a question of the drug addiction. We've got the work of a wayside chapel here, who are trying to combat this. We've got the younger people who are attracted because of a diversity in this area, who come here, who live. We've got the prostitutes, we've got the pimps, we've got the illegal gambling places and so on. All this is the ingredients which we've got to take into account when we start preparing an action plan. And this is, quite honestly, an awesome job to accomplish.
Yes, indeed, an awesome job, but there are already a few signs of the way you're going about the task.
Well, yes, of course, one of the things that we have done is to re-landscape this very same Fitzroy Gardens where we are now sitting right here. This is, I consider, to be an oasis in the heart of King's Cross. I think one of our major problems is to try and stop using this area as a through area for traffic. That means, as I mentioned earlier, a place for people, especially because so many people come here to be entertained. And for example, we've seen developments, private developments, like a village development, which caters precisely in the way we'd like to see this happen.
King's Cross presents us with one bundle of problems, but the great new national challenge of reshaping our sprawling metropolitan suburbs and of creating entirely new cities demands the same dedication, patience and hard work, but presents entirely different problems and entirely new and exciting opportunities. I've been exploring these opportunities for years now with Alistair Knox in Melbourne.
Alistair, you and I see urban settlements as landscapes of the soul. What does that mean in terms of re-inspiring existing suburbia and the creation of new cities, new communities?
I think cities have become lost because they've lost their identity and their sense of community, and we've got to recreate those things before we can get new cities worthy of the name. Take this area down here, which is an eastern Melbourne suburb. It's a post-war suburb, and secretly everyone in Melbourne believes that God dwells somewhere in these eastern suburbs. But when you look at it, it's maybe inspiring to those who haven't really looked at it, but I see it as a roofscape that wants a verticality. There is no sense of identity in it. It's just the one thing, a conforming area. The valley that we're looking at here has got desecrated and denigrated over the years. As a matter of fact, a little further down, there are paling fences on each side of it as though people are ashamed of a creek. Now, once this must have been one of those beautiful little Melbourne creeks. How do we recapture quality if we can't redevelop these creek beds?
Supposing that instead of suburban Melbourne, this was the virgin site for a new community of 200,000 or 300,000 or 400,000 people, how could we shape it better?
Well, the first thing we would require, George, is a new sense of totality. What's gone wrong with this has become piecemeal. What we've got to do is see things whole and see them clear. And we must plan not for houses or streets or motor cars. We must plan essentially for people. If we do that and we relate other things to them, we get a community that has people at its top and therefore communicates. We get mystery because people will create these things. The magic that comes into towns doesn't come by chance. It comes by the personality of individuals describing the places they love. And I think when you look at the things that you remember as a boy, the gullies that you played in, and the mysteries that you had of yourself, I think they never leave us. And as we get older, we yearn more and more for them. And real planning has got to do with these indefinable things that go on in human beings.
I'd like to see a national land use plan, a plan for the future distribution of population and jobs throughout Australia. Most Australians have chosen to live as close to the coast as they can get, and in the future, more will want to live near the coasts. From Cooktown in the north to Eden, right down the east coast. From Orbost to Mount Gambier, from Georgetown to Wynyard, from Geraldton to Bunbury. We've got magnificent coastlines with magnificent marine national parks alongside them. We can have land national parks up and down those coasts, say every 20 or 30 miles, and in between them new ports, new industrial complexes, new cities. I think that's a challenge for the next 25 years. So let's take the plunge.